Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be talking about BT05 and looking at what BT05 has to offer, and it's offering a lot of new and powerful tools to create and diversify a whole bunch of new and interesting decks. So today's deck that I'm going to be looking at is going to be Security Control. So Security Control is a really powerful deck, and it's been in the game for quite a while, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon because they keep printing new and powerful option cards and new and powerful security Digimon to keep the deck afloat, on top of the amount of recovery it has and the types of tools it has to recover are all just meshing and melding into a very powerful deck that could be built in a whole bunch of different ways, all depending on the types of tools you want to be utilizing. So, going over the deck, starting with the Digitama, I'm going to be running any red egg you feel like you want to be running. So, Yokomon is just the filler for that, but the whole purpose behind it just running the red egg and no red Digimon in the deck is so that way we don't have to bother putting any red sources into our deck to utilize our red option cards. So, it's just that they're acting as the red source and nothing more. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Salamon. So this is the BT02 Salamon, and this Salamon is still really good for the deck just because it has this nice on-delete ability where if we have 3 or fewer cards in our security, then we get to recover 1. So this is just really good because it allows us to chip into the opponent's security. Hopefully Salamon will end up getting deleted, so that way we could get the recover 1, and the recover 1 is really important because we want the majority of our cards to be in our security to trigger their security effects rather than just hard playing them. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Lucemon. So Lucemon is just an absolutely insane card to be running for the style of deck just because it has 10,000 DP as a level 3, and it has an on-play ability of allowing us to recover 1, so that way we could try to put the cards we're trying to see into our security more often than not, and on top of which it has another ability where it reduces its play cost by 8 as long as we have 10 or more cards in our trash, which if they're attacking into our security and we're using up some of our cards, 10 cards will just naturally end up being in our trash at some point. So playing a Lucemon for 5 definitely feels really, really good, considering it's a lot more memory efficient than one of the other cards that we're running, but it's still a really good card to be running nonetheless. So the other card that I was mentioning is going to be 3 copies of Magna Angemon. So Magna Angemon is definitely a really powerful card just because he has a very similar ability to Lucemon, where it's an on-play, you get to recover 1. So recovery is just already really good for what the deck is trying to do, but the big difference between him and Lucemon is this is a level 5, and you can Digivolve on top of it, where Lucemon you can't, but Lucemon could potentially cost 5 memory, where this costs 7, so 5 is just a little bit more efficient for 7, on top of which Lucemon has a 10k body, and this is a 6k body. But regardless, you're just running Magna Angemon for very similar reasons why you're running Lucemon, is just for that on-play recovery ability, and then you could even utilize Magna Angemon to Digivolve into some of your other Megas, and that makes Magna Angemon definitely a really good card to consider running. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Mistymon. So Mistymon is just another really good on-play level 5 that we have access to, where its on-play ability is 2 of the opponent's Digimon get minus 3,000 DP for the turn. So this is just a good way to just DP reduce the opponent's Digimon. Ideally, you're going to be utilizing this card to kill off 2 rookies on the opponent's field. It can potentially hit a couple of different champions, but more often than not, you're just using this to just kill off a whole field of rookies, or try to kill off as many rookies as you possibly can. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Machinedramon. So Machinedramon is just a pretty decent Digimon just because he is a blocker, and blockers are pretty good to be running, so that way we could try to stop or stem some of the opponent's aggression, and on top of which he even has a nice on-play ability where we get to de-Digivolve 2 on 2 of the opponent's Digimon, so even if they are trying to build a go-wide board and Digivolve ever so slightly on each of them, Machinedramon could just reduce them, so that way it makes it harder for them to continuously push the aggression as safely as they possibly can. And on top of that, Machinedramon is a black Digimon, which will be important for the level 7 that we're going to be running. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Seraphimon. So Seraphimon, it could really be anything you feel like you want to be utilizing. I just feel like for what the deck is trying to be doing, Seraphimon is still a pretty good option to be playing around with, just because he evos for 3, which is rather efficient, and he has a nice when digivolving ability of being able to recover 1. So pair that up with Magna Angemon or Mistymon, and it allows you to just recover 1, and that's pretty decent. Just because, again, recovery is huge for the deck, so that way our security can be as powerful as it possibly can be. And he also has another really nice ability where during your turn, while you have 3 or more cards in your security, then this Digimon gains Security Attack +1. So Security Attack +1 just allows him to aggress it that much easier onto the opponent, and even though his DP is on the weaker side, we don't necessarily care whether he lives or dies, we just care if he could try to get the second check to just put the opponent even more on a timer, because we are a chip install style of deck that is just trying to control and remove any threats that the opponent has, so our Digimon can go in unopposed. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Magnadramon. So Magnadramon is still one of the most important Digimon in this deck, just because it has the very powerful on-play ability where if we have 3 or fewer cards in our security, then we get to recover 2, and that's just really powerful just because it allows us to increase our security by quite a lot, and with our security being as dangerous as it is, it's definitely a huge threat for the opponent to try to fight through even more security when our security is so strong. And then on top of which, it has another nice bonus where it has a good when attacking ability where we get to play 1 yellow level 3 Digimon from our hand for free. So this is really good because it could play our Lucimons for free, so that way we could ignore the play cost, and it allows us to also play our Salamons for free. So Magnadramon still has some good synergy with the deck, and it's still just a very decent card in its own right. Next up, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Omnimon Zwart D. So Omnimon Zwart D is an absolutely insane card for this deck to be running, just because of how much synergy and how much potential this card has. So first big thing to note is that this Digimon has 13,000 DP, and it evos off of purple or black, so you can even consider putting in some purple cards if you want, but that's why we're kind of running Machinedramon, so that way if Omnimon Zwart D is in our hand and we have a Machinedramon on our field, then we have a way to Digivolve into Omnimon Zwart D to utilize his ability. Otherwise, he is kind of a dead card in our hand, or very hard to get out. You can still reasonably play him for his play cost of 15, but that's just a lot of memory to be giving the opponent. But what this card is doing that's so insane is the fact that he has a very powerful security ability where the attacking Digimon doesn't battle this security Digimon, so unfortunately he won't be able to delete any of the opponent's Digimon that attack into Omnimon Zwart D in security, but you do get to play this card for free, and a free level 7 just sounds really good, especially when he has 2 very strong abilities. So when we're utilizing him to Digivolve off of Machinedramon, we get the when Digivolving ability to delete one of the opponent's Tamers, and that could be absolutely huge depending on the matchup and how the current state of the game is progressing, just because deleting that Tamer could matter quite a lot. And then on top of which, what you're really trying to go for is his on-delete ability, where you get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon. So when he's swinging into the opponent's security, he's just already being very threatening, and they're going to have to eventually try to deal with this threat, and then when they do, they're going to be losing a Digimon for dealing with him. So he's just a really good card to be playing overall, and obviously the most ideal thing for him is to just try to recover enough to try to see him in the security as much as we possibly can, so that way he could come out for free and put a lot of pressure onto the opponent that way. Next, onto the options, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Ultimate Flare. So Ultimate Flare is Black's first big removal option card, and this card is definitely looking to be very powerful for the style of deck to be playing, just because its main ability is De-Digivolve 3 on one of the opponent's Digimon, and then you get to delete all of the opponent's Digimon in play with a play cost of 3 or less. So this card is doing something very similar to why we're running Mistymon, where we're trying to deal with those go-wide strategies, and most of the time those go-wide strategies are just going to be spamming out rookies or champions, and the fact that Ultimate Flare could delete a lot of rookies and a very select few champions definitely makes Ultimate Flare a very good card to be utilizing for this deck, especially since it has the ever so nice security ability of activating its main effect, so even when it's checked in the security, it has that very high board wipe potential to just delete a lot of the opponent's Digimon, and at worst, there's going to be a very high chance it's going to delete the one Digimon you're de-digivolving, and that's just what makes this card really, really good. On top of which, if you pair that up with Machinedramon's de-digivolve 2 on 2 of the opponent's Digimon before, then it's going to be very hard for them to keep a very strong Digimon in play, and that just makes Ultimate Flare that much stronger of a card to be playing. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Transcendent Sword. So Transcendent Sword is a new red removal option card, and this card is acting very similar to Gaia Force. Granted, it's not as strong as Gaia Force, but it still has a very wide variety of cards this can be targeting, just because its main ability allows you to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 11,000 DP or less, and then if we have a Digimon with Omnimon or Greymon in its name on our field, then we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 15,000 DP or less instead. So we are playing Omnimon Zwart D, which does count towards Transcendent Sword. So Transcendent Sword, at worst, being able to delete 11,000 just allows us to delete a lot of potential targets already, but as long as Zwart D is on the field, then it can delete almost any Digimon in the game, as long as it's not DP boosted. And that's what makes Transcendent Sword so powerful coming out of the security, just because it also has the classic security ability of activating its main effect. So obviously we're going to want to try to push this into our security, but at worst we could still hardcast it for 7 just because we have a red egg and we'll always have access to playing this card. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gaia Force. So Gaia Force is still just an absolutely insane removal option, just because for 1 more memory than Transcendent Sword, we get to delete any one of the opponent's Digimon. So that's just what makes Gaia Force so good, is just its delete ability isn't restricted to anything, and there's no limits on it other than just selecting one of the opponent's Digimon, and it even has the nice security ability of activating its main. So all of these security abilities activating their main effect definitely is what makes these cards really, really powerful, and why we want to try to recover as much as we possibly can to push them into our security, so that way our security is going to be doing all of the work on deleting the opponent's Digimon, while we're just passively playing Digimon and trying to swing into the opponent's security, chipping them out for the game, or stalling long enough for a deck out strategy, and having lots of removal in our security definitely makes it really good, especially with how strong a lot of the removal is. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Blade of the True. So Blade of the True is a pretty okay option card. I've been debating back and forth whether Blade of the True or Arrow Dragons is better, but Blade of the True is still just a really good card to be utilizing just because it has a low play cost of 2. But what this card is doing is it has the nice main ability where you get to draw 1 card for every 2 security that we have. So at the beginning of the game is probably the best time to play this card, so that way we're at least guaranteed 2 cards, but if we're able to recover 1 off of a Magna Angemon, and then we're able to utilize Blade of the True the next turn, then Blade of the True will give us 3 card draws, which is really good and really powerful, and in a deck like this, we definitely need to try to draw as much as we possibly can. So Blade of the True is definitely really good for that, and on top of which, it has the nice security ability of activating its main effect, so even when it's checked in your security, if this is the first card in your security check, then you're still going to be drawing 2 cards, but more often than not, in the mid to late game, you're going to be still drawing at least 1 card, which could be decent enough depending on how many cards you have in your hand and where the current state of the game currently is. And then the last option card of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Eden's Javelin. So Eden's Javelin is still just an absolutely insane option card to be running for this deck, even though it is ever so slightly weaker because we're not playing a yellow egg package. It's still just a very good card to have just because its main ability allows us to draw 1 card. Then one of our opponent's Digimon gets minus 1000 DP for each card we have in our hand. So there are going to be times where we don't necessarily have a lot of cards in our hand, which makes Eden's Javelin a little bit on the weaker side. But as long as Eden's Javelin is able to take out a mid-tier Digimon, that's really all we're trying to utilize the card for. And like I said, even though we don't have as much card draw because we're not running a yellow egg package to try to draw more cards earlier, it's still just a good card because we could still end up having a decently sized hand. And again, as long as we're just deleting a Digimon with this card, but it also has the nice security ability of activating its main effect, and we still definitely want to utilize this card at worst for the card draw, at best to remove another body from the field. Next, onto the Tamers, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Izzy. So this is the BT04 Izzy, and this Izzy is really good just because he is going to be the Black Tamer, so that way if we ever see Ultimate Flare in our hand, then we're able to utilize the card without Machinedramon on the field. So Izzy's really good for that, on top of which Izzy is also going to be the deck's dedicated memory fixing tamer. So if we have 3 or less memory, then Izzy will always hard set us to 3, which is really good. So that way we can make our plays as efficient as we possibly can in terms of memory management. And then on top of that, he even has another ability where it's an on-play ability where we get to look at the top 3 cards of our deck, and then if all of them are black, we get to gain a memory. More often than not, that part of the ability is almost never going to be triggering, so he's always just going to be 4. But what's important is we get to place the cards back on the top of our deck in any order. And this is really good, so that way we know what we're going to be drawing and what we could possibly be trying to force into our security. And that's what makes Izzy really, really powerful, paired up with the recovery mechanic, is the ability to just have that type of knowledge to know what we're going to be putting into our security if we're able to. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of the Duo Tamer, Tai and Matt. So this Duo Tamer is definitely a really good card to be running for this deck just because it punishes the opponent for having a level 6 or higher Digimon in play by allowing us to gain 2 additional memory at the start of our turn. So because we are just giving the opponent a decent amount of memory more often than not, they're going to try to get into their level 6s, and then we could punish them for going into their level 6s by gaining 2 memory off of Matt and Tai, on top of it just allowing us to make our plays that much more efficient, paired up with Izzy, where we could potentially start our turns with 5 memory, and that's just a pretty healthy amount of memory to be starting out with, and this ability does stack, so the more Tai and Mats we see, the higher chance we'll be gaining even more memory, so that way we could try to make our plays as powerful and efficient as we possibly can. And then on top of which, it also has another really nice ability where during your turn, your Digimon with Omnimon in its name gets security attack +1, so it's going to be giving our Omnimon Zwart D an additional security check, so he could apply more pressure onto the opponent more than what he's already doing. And then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of TK. So this is the starter deck TK, and this TK is really only in the deck just because he has a low play cost, and he also has the nice ability where during the opponent's turn, all of our security Digimon get plus 2000 DP, so this is just really good at making our Digimon even more threatening in the security, so that way it's even harder for them to deal with it, and that's just really good considering, again, we are a recovery style of deck, and we want our security to be putting in as much work as it possibly can be, so making our security Digimon a little bit stronger just seems like a really good idea on something you could possibly do, and really start to stack up his ability to make it even harder for the opponent to want to aggress into our security, so that way we'll have a higher chance of their Digimon getting deleted by whatever is going to be in our security. And then, as I stated before, there's just a ton of different things you could do with the deck, all depending on what you want to utilize and how you want to build the deck. So you could think about utilizing a yellow low end, so you could be running Cupimon as a really good Digitama to try to draw some cards early on, and then you could increase the overall aggression of the deck by throwing in Bushi Agumon. Then you have access to a whole bunch of other really powerful yellow cards, so your options are still pretty decent in the form of 7 Heavens, even though this card is a little bit weaker. than a lot of the other removal, it's still a removal card that comes out of your security, or you could consider recovering a little bit more with Holy Wave or Tactical Retreat. Then you also have access to Kentarosmon as just another really good level 6 that you could be utilizing, and same thing with Magnadramon. And then on top of that, you could consider running Chaosmon Volderarm to just add more level 7s into the deck and be that much more threatening. On top of which, you also have TK, which can act as a really good memory fixing tamer on top of fixing your hand and potentially your security. And you even have a yellow security Digimon that could play itself for free in the form of Ankyomon. Then, speaking of security Digimon, you also have some more red cards that you could consider playing. So the security Greymon is really good to be running, especially if you're playing Heir of Dragons, just because Heir of Dragons is another card that could help draw cards and delete the opponent's Digimon. And then you could even run a red low end if you want, because you do have a couple of good red low end cards like Agumon to help dig your tamers, and Agumon Expert to basically act as a one-card combo to keep recycling your Agumon Experts to have something to play. Then you also could consider running the Red Tai, just because he is the cheapest red tamer that we currently have. So if you just want a red source on your field, this is a really good card to consider running. Then you still have some pretty decent removal cards in the form of Plasma Stake to delete a lot of big threats, and you have Trident Revolver to try to play your tamers for free and delete a mid-sized threat. On top of which, you have Volcanic Dramon to just act as another board clear potential card. Then, in terms of some more black cards, if you want to run a heavier black package, you have some really good black blocking cards. So Mechanarimon is definitely a really good black blocker that has a very low play cost and a very decent ability to try to wall out the opponent's low-level Digimon. And they even have a black security Digimon with blocker, so you could just have another security Digimon and a blocker all at the same time. And if you want to double down on Heir of Dragons a little bit more, then you even have Black War Greymon if you are going that Megazoo style of deck to consider playing, just because he could reduce his play cost, which is pretty decent. And then you also have Craniumon to just add as extra protection, depending on how heavy you go with the blockers. Then you have a really solid purple package that you also could consider running. So you have Chimeramon that can delete one of your Digimon. Mostly you want to try to delete Salamon to try to delete one of the opponent's Digimon. Then you also have Deathclaw that's doing something very similar. And you also have Dandevimon as just another really annoying card for the opponent to try to deal with that you could use to Digivolve into Zwart D with. And you even have a Purple Tamer to act as some more annoyance for the opponent trying to aggress into your security. And you still have really powerful removal option cards you could be consider running in purple, like Trump Sword, Earthshaker, and Hell's Gate. But this is just the core that I decided to settle on, just because it seems like a very well-rounded core, and for the most part, there are cards that, no matter what version of the deck you're going to be playing, you can't really escape from, and those cards are going to be Gaia Force, Transcendent Sword, Omnimon Zwart D, Magnadramon, Magna-Angemon, and Lucemon. Those are kind of like the core cards that are going to be in almost every version of the deck in some way, shape, or form, just because all of those cards are very powerful, and the rest of the deck kind of is just whatever you feel like you want to be utilizing, just because it is a very powerful and very flexible and versatile deck, and it is just a very strong deck as a result that could adapt to a lot of different situations and a lot of different metas, depending on what the meta is actually shaping up and looking like. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are different ways that you could support me in the channel. So one of those ways is I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so whenever you use that affiliate link to buy cards off of tcgplayer.com, then some of the money will go to supporting me in the channel. And on top of which, I also do stream over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu. So following and subbing is a good way to support me over on that platform as well. And on top of that, I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook. So whenever you buy one of my designs through them, then some of that money will also help go to supporting me in the channel. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.